Hey y'all, what's up? Welcome back to my gloriously dreary, gray, sleeping January garden. Oh, today is my first garden planning video of 2025. A little later than I normally do. A lot of times I get really in a rush to talk to you guys about garden plans and seed starting and all that stuff, but this is my 8th season making content here on YouTube. This will be my 8th gardening season with y'all. I'm curious how many of you have been here from the very start, from those first early garden tours back when I thought maybe somebody out there might want to enjoy my garden with me, because I didn't have a whole lot of that at that time. I didn't have a whole lot of friends who were into gardening, and now, you know, I could actually fool myself into believing that the whole world loves it, because so much of my experience of people is that, you know, you do. This year we've been kind of restful, and I haven't been in a huge rush to get out here yet. I wanted to really rest this season. There is a quote, I'm gonna make sure I get it right, I've got it pulled up here, by Josephine Nuse that says, "Anyone who thinks that gardening begins in the spring and ends in the fall is missing the best part of the whole year, for gardening begins in January with a dream." There's Sweet Maya out there tending to the animals. Oh, I definitely have a dream for this garden. 8 seasons into documenting my garden and sharing it with the world, I have definitely come to become very comfortable with the reality that standing in the dreary, gray, sleeping garden in January, it may feel like not much is going on here. It may feel like this is not a beautiful space, but I also know just how very quickly this is going to explode with life, be full of fragrances. I can stand here and feel the summer sun on my skin. I can anticipate the beauty and the joy and the flavors that will come from the space. And the beautiful thing about the garden that I have come to know, like, and count on is that it always comes back. There's a fresh start every year. It's really, really incredible. And actually a very hopeful thing. And so before I jump into the logistics of seed starting and all of the planning and all of the stuff that we will inevitably talk about over the next few weeks, first I want to talk to you guys about what I think probably is one of the most important garden planning videos I could ever shoot, which is talking about knowing your why and how important it is whenever you're going to do anything that requires a long haul to set a standard. We are going to sit here in my nice warm greenhouse with my puny little lemon tree here next to us and talk about this, and we're going to do it in here instead of out there because I am a frost tender flower, and while the South Carolina winter has come back to be its normal self, which means it's not freezing, we just had a really cold snap where we got some real winter weather, which is rare. It's still too cold for me. I am very, very much a frost tender flower for sure. If you have been around since those early garden seasons, you've probably heard me share this message, I mean, a lot over and over again. I love to say we need to know our why. And I can say that and we can come from kind of a philosophical standpoint, but I'm actually being very practical when I talk about knowing your why for the garden season and setting the standard for the garden season. So interestingly, when I use that phrase, set a standard, you know, a lot of times we'll hear, oh, we need to raise the standard, which means we need to do better. I'm not saying that. Whenever I'm talking about setting my standard for this season, I'm not saying a measure by which I'm going to strive towards, because in the garden, let me just tell you right now, if you're a new gardener, if you've been gardening for a long time, you can say amen along with me here, because this is something that if you have been gardening for any time at all, you know this. You're going to work really hard. You are going to experience failure, but you're also going to experience wins. You're going to be incredibly proud. You may even experience abundance to the point that it is overwhelming. The garden is such a place of growth, and I love being a gardener. And I would say when I talk about setting a standard, I'm kind of thinking more about how, like, in a battle an army would raise a standard. It was like the rallying point. It was like the, hey, this is what we're doing this for, is this standard. This is the representation of what we're doing this for in battling. And I view that in the garden. When I think about raising a standard, it's almost like a billboard that's up above my garden when I'm working. And that when I am feeling overwhelmed, or when it's hard, or when it feels burdensome, or any of those things, I can look back and look at my billboard that I set in my optimistic January where I have the dream, and I can go, oh yeah, that's what I'm doing. And then it also can help to raise standards. And I mean, this is applying in anything in your life. You know, you want to create a food culture in your home. You want to create a culture in your family. You want to do homesteading, whatever it is. You're trying to run a business, and you raise a standard. You know what it is that you're doing it for. And that eliminates so much decision fatigue. You know, it helps you stay on track. It may change year to year. I'm not saying that this is something that we should ever do rigidly. I do not think that really anything when it comes to gardening can maintain rigidity for long. You can try, but it's just too organic. Just the process of growing plants and growing food, you are going to have to partner with the earth that is going to do things that seem fickle to you. Like, you are going to have to learn and to bob and weave and, you know, go with the flow to a certain degree. So there is also a measure of having kind of an anchor point that you're coming back to, so that you don't get to an end of a gardening season and feel like you failed completely because you ended up going so far off of your goals. I want to share with you kind of my thought process and how I am making the choices of what I'm going to be doing in my garden this year. And I'm probably in a different place than a lot of you all are. Because I would say our situation may be unique, and we moved to our new farm. We started working on the farm 4 years ago this spring, but we had already purchased it 4 years ago at this point. I really had such a clear vision at that point that I really wanted to build a lot of community resources. And the thing is, I still very much do. I am very, very community minded, and I believe in localizing food. I believe in empowering people to grow things themselves, and for those of us who have the capacity to grow extra, to grow extra. What happened with us is we had that standard of wanting to be able to make an impact in our community. But I think that in going after that, we maybe forgot a different standard, which was to absolutely cover the needs of our family first. And sometimes you'll find yourself with one goal, and then you get another goal along the way, and you get to a place where you have to readjust. It's not that you have to throw one of them out, but you have to find the balance again. That's what we've been doing, is just finding the balance. So we've downsized a lot of things in our farm over the last 6-7 months. And one of the things that we're planning on downsizing is the garden. When I first said that on a video, I had a lot of people be like, why in the world, like when grocery store prices are going up, why in the world, when there's, you know, kind of crazy things going on in the world, would you want to grow less food? And I would challenge the mindset that just because you are doing a bigger thing, that means it's better for you. You can actually do a lot more with a well-managed smaller space than a very large space that's in chaos. So for our standard, my number one goal in growing food this year is I want to grow as much food for my family to eat in fresh eating as possible. But I really want to get back to fully connecting with the joy of growing that food for myself and for my family. Like, I really want my family to be involved with me in the garden and in growing that food. If that looks like a year of simplifying and cutting back, I actually theorize, I don't know, I can't say that this will be for sure, but I actually think that an efficiently planned and planted smaller garden, which I'm still gonna have a pretty dang big garden, but I think it will actually be more productive than it was when I had more space. When you have less and you have to be very mindful of how you steward it, you're just more likely to get the most out of it. I mentioned fresh eating. I love walking out to my farm, to my garden, and harvesting what I'm going to cook that day. It is just, I don't know how to explain it. It is one of the greatest joys of my life. I feel so satisfied and so happy when I can go out and harvest what I'm going to cook that day. Right now, I have growing in my high tunnel broccoli and kale and root vegetables, and I have been regularly going out harvesting food and carrying it back in the house and making lunch or dinner with it. It is just a joy that I want to have as much of in my life as possible. A few years ago, I'd set a goal for myself. I guess I could say probably like 5 or 6 years ago, I'd set a goal for myself that I wanted to grow a year's worth of food. And in doing that, I really shifted some of the ways that I was gardening, and I really shifted a lot of the ways I was planting, how I was planting, because I was planting my garden to largely account for having a lot of excess all at once to be able to preserve, to can, dry, freeze, dry, freeze. We did a lot of that. I mean, we put up a lot of food, and I will not say that I won't ever do that again. I think I will come back at some point to that being the goal. For me, this year, for the time being, while we're simplifying, while we're taking things back to the foundation, that is not necessarily my goal. My goal is more being able to go out and harvest food right away and cook it. I will plan on some preserving. Specifically, there are certain things that it just is very cost effective to grow lots of to preserve. For instance, tomatoes. I like cooking chilies and soups that have tomato bases in the winter when tomatoes don't grow. So that's something that I can very easily grow excess of, and I can those. I like having some okra on the off season. I make gumbos on the off season, and I like having some pre-breaded okra that I can fry, and little pickled okra. I like having pickles. So there's definitely still going to be preservation in my garden plan, but I'm not necessarily looking to eat things in excess outside of their season, even if they're things that I grew. For some people, that's not going to be a standard you're going to set. I live in a very mild climate. I can actually grow food year-round. As I mentioned, in January right now, I have lots of food growing in my high tunnels that I can go harvest. What I suspect this is going to look like is a lot of succession sowing. That's kind of my plan going into this year. I am growing quite a few varieties of things, because if you think I want to come out daily and get different things, I want things constantly coming ripe in my garden, which means I'm going to plant things at different times and different varieties. I really, as I mentioned in my billboard standard that I'm raising that I can look back to, I really do want to reconnect with joy and simplicity. This one I don't know, I don't know how many people will be like, oh, I totally get that, because I don't know how many people have had their gardens turn into a very public place that was kind of a place of work for them. I think a lot of people probably noticed over the last couple of years, like in garden tours and stuff, and I think people mean well when they pointed it out, but they're like, oh, I can just tell your heart's not in this anymore. I liked your old garden better and stuff like that, and I think people mean well. The truth is that I was overwhelmed. I was just really overwhelmed. It's crazy that in all the good intentions of being like, I want to make this really big garden that has all these different ways of growing so I can show people, so I can help people, so I can open the garden gate for people, I kind of had put making something for other people ahead of making something for my own heart. This is probably the most simple way to put it. And I didn't feel as deeply connected to it. You're right. I mean, you saw it. I didn't feel as deeply connected to it. But ultimately, that was more a travesty for me than it was for anybody else. And I get it that other people may have expressed disappointment. And I think that I had to get over like the feelings of defensiveness for me to even validate what I was feeling. All of that to say, I am growing this year. I'm doing something very different. In the last several years, I've done tons of experiments, partially because I liked experiments, partially because I like showing experiments. This year, I'm actually not doing a lot of experiments. I'm not doing a lot of expansion. I'm not trying a lot of new things. This year, I am doing all of my favorite things. I am planting all of my favorite things to grow and eat. I'm not planting 80 varieties of tomatoes this year. It is cool when I plant 80 varieties of tomatoes, but it is not cool when I'm so overwhelmed by everything that I don't even end up shooting the videos. Right now, I'm still making my list and getting my seeds together. Of course, I've got lots of saved bags of seeds literally everywhere. Right now, my tomato list is 17 long. I'll share it with you guys when I finalize it. I'm starting the seeds like next week, I think. But yeah, I'm growing a garden for myself. That's why I started it. I did not start gardening to grow food for my family. I did not start gardening to teach other people how to garden. I started gardening because I wanted it so badly. And in it, I found such a respite and a refuge. And I found myself and I loved the garden. I felt like I was coming alive. I felt like I understood so much about humans and how we're made and what God meant for us. And sadly, in trying to care for everybody else and meet all the needs and grow all the food and the year's worth of food and for the family and preserve and make sure we have enough of this and make sure I've got the content, somewhere along the way, I got to where I would come and I would sit quietly in my garden and I would just feel just slightly a stranger to it. And I don't even know exactly how to describe that. But I've decided that this year I am growing my favorite things only. I am growing primarily in my raised bed garden. I'm going to be doing my high tunnels, and I've got a little bit of in-ground space that I'm going to do for like pumpkins and some potatoes, some things that just do better in the ground, but mostly I'm not doing the in-ground. Mostly I'm doing the raised beds because I like the raised beds. They're art to me and I like them, and that's what I want to do. Every decision that I'm making and planning, and Maya and I have been coming out here and walking our garden belt, and we're making all these plans for projects. You know, he's coming in and he's building arbors. That's like one of the first projects. He's going to build some arbors so I can plant some roses on them and put a garden gate up. And I think that on my standard, on my billboard of like my plan for this year, when I'm really getting to the why, is I have this feeling of like, I need the poetry back in my garden. I need my heart to feel at home there. I need it to just be my favorite place in the world. I need that. And ultimately, it's gonna make all the other things better. I've said for a long time, the best medicine for the garden is the gardener. And my case may not be your case. Maybe you didn't have a massive audience come along that you felt like you needed to cater to, and somehow you know, in all the best intentions, you lost yourself a little bit. I don't know, maybe you did. But the thing is so often we start something because it sings to us and because it makes our hearts feel like poetry and because it brings us to life, and somewhere along the way obligation wheedles in. And yes, you're going to work in a garden. You're going to work hard in a garden. But that's not the measure of something being obligatory. I work hard for my family out of joy. And the moment that it starts to feel like obligation is when it starts to zap my joy. I work hard for my family because it is a privilege to be theirs. And they are a privilege to serve. They're a privilege to care for. And it is the exact same thing with my garden. As long as I can stay in a place where my heart is at home and I recognize that I am doing this hard work because it is a form of caring for myself and giving myself my dreams and my needs, it doesn't feel like work. It doesn't feel obligatory. It doesn't feel overwhelming. And right now in the planning stage, I'm actually having to rein myself in. There's a Jekyll and Hyde thing going on here. I'll just let you know. Like I'm sitting here going, I'm going to plant my favorite things only. I am going to make a garden. I am so excited. I want to feel familiarity there. Like I want to have a sense of knowing what to expect because I like that. And that's what I'm going to do. And then I'm like, oh, but that looks good. And what if we did that? And I'm literally having to like rein myself in a little bit. Will there end up being a few experiments? I'm sure there will be. I'm sure though they'll make their way in. But really, primarily, I am going to hold myself to the standard when I'm making all of these choices. I'm going to look and say, actually, no, I want to create the garden that's going to really sing to me and that is familiar and that I feel success in and that I'm excited about. I want to this year, instead of trying to grow, you know, gobs of hybrids to get the most production, or instead of trying to try lots and lots of new things to make cool content, I want to invite foods that I have had successes with, that were there for my first wins, that were there from the beginning. I want to invite them into my garden and welcome them like old friends. That is really like a goal for me this year. Another thing that's changed that's really kind of going into how I'm planning is my children are home and they're homeschooled now. And so the garden is going to be part of their classroom. Standard, getting back to the joy, simplifying. In the past, I have given my children space, and there was one summer they got really into it. They had their own garden, they managed everything pretty well. Then they got kind of over it, and then they would get kind of excited during planting time, but they would sort of lose interest. So what I am doing this year, I really want my children involved. I don't want them to view it as just work, but I am teaching my children something. This is on my billboard. We'll see how it goes. I'll let you guys know once we're done with the season. I am inviting my children into an opportunity to care for their mom in a way that very much shows her that they love her. That's what I've told them. So whereas they have in the past, I've tried to make it for them. And my kids are older. My boys that I'm, going to be at home with are 10, almost 10, almost 12, and almost 13. So this is not toddlers. With like preschoolers, toddlers, you kind of got to be like, okay, here's your space. Here are the seeds, you can sow them. And then you're going to take care of it. That's kind of how it goes. And they'll come and help some, and they'll keep up with it depending on their personalities and what they're able to do. And they may even be big helps and then eventually graduate to having their own spaces. But with my kids being the age that they are, and that they're not showing a ton of interest in gardening aside from when I'm doing it, they're like, oh yeah, I want to do that. Let me plant, or let me pick, or let me do whatever. I'm actually inviting them in to join me in caring for my garden as an act of service towards me. And that's not to say that they won't have ownership. That's not to say I'm going to plant tons of melons and the things that I know they like, varieties they've showed interest in the past. I always plant those for my kids, and I grow them for them. And so in them coming in and saying, yeah, Mom, I'm going to help you with your garden, I can then turn around and go, look what I planted in my garden for you. And my hope is that will cultivate a sense of connection and a sense of pride of self in them. Not just that, oh, I had a garden bed and I took care of it and I grew it. But there's also something to be learned, for any young person, but especially for these young men that I'm raising, that there is something incredibly gratifying in serving another person's dream. And that is something that I really want to focus on this year. And that will look like really praising them for the things that they do, for showing them the things that they helped create, and really nurturing a realization of what that is doing for me. But I was tempted in making my garden plan to be like, oh, since we're homeschooling, this will be his bed, this will be his bed, this will be his bed. And then I thought about it. I'm like, no, actually, I don't want to do that. I need my heart garden back, and therefore I'm not even ready to start splitting it up for them. I need my heart garden back, and therefore what I am going to offer them is an invitation to help Mom build the garden of her heart and to have ownership of that. And I think that that's a really good lesson. I think it's a really good goal too. Different approach, maybe somewhat similar actual palpable results as far as the vegetables we'll get, but of the relationship, I think that there may be something really special to be had there. So with that, and this is what happens when you decide this is what I'm doing. And some of you may have the exact opposite goals to me. You may be like, I am going to grow a year's worth of food. I am going to garden way more efficiently. I am going to, I'm going to stop growing silly things and I'm going to grow all productive things. That's okay. I applaud you. Like you do that. Like this is not me saying, here's what I'm doing, so you should do it too. I'm saying in assessing what I need personally as a gardener and for my family and what we need, this is what I have decided. And you should also do that thing. You should also do that and have confidence. And here's a beautiful thing. If you get through this year and you're like, I did not like that being my goal, just do it different next year. It's completely okay. You're not gambling your entire career as a gardener here. You're making the decision of how you're going to try the garden on this year and see if it fits you well. When you set this standard, when you say, here's my why, this is why I want to grow, it does actually, as I said, eliminate decision fatigue. Because when something that may excite you, oh, that's really cool, you go, wait, hold on, does this support my overall goal of what I'm trying to cultivate in my garden and in myself as a gardener this year? And if the answer is no, you can confidently just be like, well, you know what, we'll come back to that. Maybe there will be time and space for that in the future. But today I'm really going to make decisions that goes towards my overall goal. On a very practical note, I am very much considering varieties that I know exactly what to do with, that I'm pretty confident of how they will behave here. As I mentioned, my favorite things, my old friends. I am planning on lots of variety, lots of succession sowing, staggered planting, so that I can keep things coming in fresh as much as possible. And there are some things that I will preserve. So for instance, I'll plant pole beans because pole beans keep setting flowers, and you can just harvest off of pole beans for, I mean, pretty much as long as you can give them vertical support. Eventually they'll kind of fall over, and when they do that, they stop producing as much flowers. Now, bush beans all more or less come on in the same period, like within a couple weeks. All of your flowers are going to come on, all your beans are going to start, and therefore you're harvesting them all pretty much at the same time. Then they're more or less spent, and you want to pull them and put more things in. So what I have done in the past is I'll plant a little bit of pole beans for fresh eating, and then I'll plant lots of rows of bush beans. And I'll plant them to all come in at the same time so I can do lots of canning of those. But the thing is like right now it's January, and while I'm glad to open a can of green beans, maybe like once a week or something like that, for the most part, what I want to eat in January is out in the high tunnel. For the most part, I'm still wanting to go pick things and eat them fresh. And it's nice to have backups. It's nice to have some preserved in case you have a bad year the next year, the next season. It is nice to have backups. I'm mostly just going to focus on in the winter, eating the food that grows in the winter. And in the summer, we're just going to eat green beans as much as we can. So I'll probably plant like smaller amounts of bush beans. I'll do a little bit of preserving. But for the most part, I'll probably succession sow pole beans in multiple places, or just succession sow smaller amounts of bush beans to eat them as they come in. Same thing with like summer squash. I'll just succession sow those about every 2 weeks so that when we deal with squash bugs and stuff, if any of them get killed, new plants are coming up. And I can keep squash coming in from like May through October easily by succession sowing. Tomatoes, I will plant extra tomatoes. I will do preserving. We'll eat lots fresh, but that is one thing that I actually will still grow to preserve because that is something I do cook a lot of my winter foods with, tomato bases and stuff like that. But like things like salsa, I probably won't aim to can just tons of salsa, maybe a little bit, but for the most part, we're just going to eat our fill when it's coming in. So I don't know. I mean, to somebody who is just like not into gardening, my efforts might not even look that different to you. Like, I mean, it's to be like, oh, she's growing a big garden. I think that this garden is going to be spectacular, maybe even more spectacular than all the rest. I know that I'm anticipating it to be. I am so excited for this gardening season, and I'm so excited to share it with you guys, my 8th season of creating content. So I would love to know what your why is. Are you looking to offset your grocery budget? In which case, you'd want to look at what it is you're buying from the grocery store and make sure that makes it on your list. You would want to look at the things that are higher ticket items at the grocery store and definitely prioritize getting those in the ground in your garden. If you are looking for food security, I know for a lot of people it's food security. For me, I feel more sense of food security in the stocked pantry of staples, in the animal products that we have stocked, and in different things that are preserved from that. But I mean, the garden is there to supplement that. But if you are looking to like really bulk up the food security you have, you may look at growing lots of staples, potatoes and sweet potatoes, and creating maybe some perennial gardens. That would be something to really look at. That is definitely a place of food security here on our farm. Maybe you are just wanting to connect with a hobby that brings you peace. Don't forget to plant the flowers. Plant the things that are interesting to you. Plant the things that grab your attention and make you want to be in the garden. And maybe you're just wanting to learn. Maybe you haven't done this before, and your why is that you want to learn to garden. Can I encourage you to set your goal to learn to be a gardener? You know, whenever you get started, there's going to be failures, and there's going to be more failures. You're never going to stop having failures. There are too many factors that go into gardening to guarantee success. But if your goal is not just this year I'm going to grow a garden, if your goal is this year I'm going to learn to be a gardener, you will. I mean, it doesn't matter what the harvest looks like. If that's your goal, you're going to learn to be a gardener. And if you learn to be a gardener, there's going to be harvest. It just may look different sometimes than others. Either way, I don't think you can really put pen to paper and start making your garden plan if you don't have the standard set and you don't have the why really kind of etched into your heart to know, like, what is my purpose here? What am I going to push through the hard stuff for? What am I going to keep showing up for? It's a good place to start. Thank you guys for hanging out with me today and all the days you do. I bless you. Until next time.